So I then sought out Project Camelot because Project Camelot was the first group that was taking interviews with insiders and putting them on YouTube. Nobody else had done it before then. And they started, I think, all the way back in 2007, right when YouTube was getting going. So there was one guy that Camelot had who would not go on camera. And his name was Henry Deacon. That's what he wanted to call himself. And that's the character from Lost in Space. So I said to Project Camelot, let me make you a deal. I will trade you everything that I have from my insider Daniel, who's not going to come forward, if you get me in touch with Henry Deacon. Let me talk to the man. Let me get him on the phone and start asking him questions. And they were very happy to oblige. I ended up talking to Henry Deacon on Skype, and I was using a pseudonym and so was he. And this turned into a friendship that produced, I would say, probably 85 hours of conversation, which I recorded. And Henry Deacon, you got to remember now, we're still talking, this is 2007, 2008. Those 2 years is where I really had the most interaction with him. And he is telling me stuff that goes even deeper down the rabbit hole than anybody else that I had met before. Henry Deacon claimed that he would go to work at a military base, which I'm not going to name. He's asked me not to. It's in the UK. It's in Britain. And if I named it, you probably would know what it was, or you could look it up. It's one of the big ones. And what he would do is he would drive in. You have to go through security checkpoints. You have armed guards with machine guns. And you park in the parking lot. You walk into a building. You go down an elevator. There's all these checkpoints all along the way. And then what he said was that there was this thing he called the corridor. At the beginning of the corridor, you have a desk. And there are military people there, and they have to interview you, and you have to have a normal conversation with them. And what he explained was that they were worried that even if you look like the right guy, even if you have the right fingerprints, and your voice sounds correct, and everything seems okay, you look the same, it may not really be you. Now, whether that's extraterrestrials or whether that's clones, he never really got specific on that. But you have to have a conversation, and you have to prove that you are yourself by saying things that are unique, individual, and personal. Things that they know. Talking about your life, talking about what you've been through. And it's only once you've done that and proven that you are really you that they let you go down this corridor. Now, what he said about the corridor was that it was actually like a round tube, a cylindrical room. It had, I believe, white polished walls, glossy walls, with little ribs along the way. And it was lit in a kind of strange way. You'd walk down to the end of this corridor, and then there was an elevator there. And it wasn't really that different than a regular elevator, except that the doors would open and close very slowly. And it was a little bit larger than a regular elevator would be. Now, as far as everybody else on that military base was concerned, this elevator was just used for freight. Because you would go in, it would open slowly, and it would only go up by one floor. But off to the side, there's a staircase, and you can go up the staircase, so there's no need to use the elevator. So this was an example of them hiding it out in the open. When Henry Deacon would go in there, however, he had a particular badge that this elevator would scan, and the badge would tell the elevator where he needed to go. And then he had an ordinary key on an ordinary key ring. And you would put the key into a lock that was on the elevator on the inside. There was a panel with just a lock in it. So the only other thing you have is the up and the down button, and that's it. So you got the up and down button for one floor, and then you got this keyhole. So he would stick his key into the keyhole, he would twist it, the doors would close very slowly, and then he said that it was, in some cases, almost imperceptible, but you'd have this feeling sort of like you got a static electric shock. Your whole body would, just like that. Very, very subtle. The doors open, and now he's on Mars. And when he would come out of the doors, he would walk through an atrium area, and there would be this bullet train type of thing. And this bullet train would travel through tubes that were similar to what the corridor looked like. Some of these tubes were underground, but in other cases, the tube was actually visible with glass or some material like glass, and you would be zipping at a very high speed past Martian terrain. And he said it looked a lot like Sedona or the Grand Canyon. A lot of the rocks were red. He said it was gorgeous. It was incredibly beautiful. So he would take this bullet train ride, and he would end up going to this large base that was on Mars. Now apparently, NASA is going to scrub images of this base out of their photographs that they take of Mars. Apparently this area could be above the ground, and also some of it is definitely underground. And it appears also that there is some sort of cloaking device where they can project a hologram so it looks like it's just regular Earth terrain or Mars terrain if you're flying overhead for whatever reason. Now, this is where the story got really bizarre, because what he said was that he was working at this base that had 200,000 personnel. Well, what do you mean by personnel? Because he kind of had a very leading way of saying it. He said only 10,000 of the personnel were born on Earth. Now, I'm hearing this stuff, again, 2007, fully 7 or 8 years before Corey Goode showed up and talked about having worked on Mars. Now, there's so much stuff that he told me, and a lot of it I still haven't really used because it's so complicated. But let's get into some of the details now. His job was working on repairing certain types of advanced equipment that were being used on this base, and it was a fairly common type of equipment, I guess. One of the things that was really controversial was that at one point he told Kerry that he was working for a program called Solar Warden, which ends up being the same program that Corey Goode described later on. But then he was so paranoid about that information getting out that he denied saying it. And Kerry Cassidy was very upset about that because he clearly had. At the time, nobody else had mentioned Solar Warden before, so this was just another detail. Apparently, the UFO hacker Gary McKinnon had mentioned it because he had seen it in some of the documents he saw in NASA when he hacked the NASA computers. But other than that, I didn't know anything about Solar Warden at all.
In 2018, President Trump announced the development of Space Force, the sixth branch of the U.S. military.
To establish a Space Force.
The President and the American public were completely unaware that it already existed.
We put together programs that went all the way out into the galaxy.